In theory, institutions value accuracy. They claim to depend on it. They invest in systems designed to produce it. They reward credentials, expertise, and analytical rigor. Accuracy is treated as the foundation of good decision-making. In practice, accuracy is often a liability. Not because it is wrong, but because it arrives at the wrong time, challenges the wrong assumptions, or threatens the wrong interests. Inside large institutions, being correct is not the same as being safe. Accuracy creates responsibility. It demands response. It forces decisions that may be costly, disruptive, or politically dangerous. And when institutions are not prepared to absorb those consequences, accuracy becomes something to manage rather than act on. This creates a paradox. Institutions depend on accurate information to function, yet they often punish those who provide it when it destabilizes existing plans or exposes structural weakness. Over time, this trains behavior in subtle but powerful ways. People learn when accuracy is welcome and when it is dangerous. They learn which conclusions advance careers and which stall them, which warnings are treated as insight and which are treated as problems. This episode examines how that process works, not through scandals or individual cases, but through structure, through incentives, through the quiet mechanisms that turn being right into a professional risk. Because once accuracy becomes a liability, institutions do not simply ignore reality. They actively train themselves to misunderstand it. The liability of accuracy begins with timing. Warnings that arrive too late are tragic. Warnings that arrive too early are disruptive. Early accuracy creates an obligation to act before consensus forms, before political cover exists, and before institutional momentum can adjust. Acting early exposes decision-makers to blame if outcomes are uncertain or costly. As a result, institutions develop an unspoken preference for delayed certainty. Information is tolerated when it confirms existing direction. It is resisted when it demands reversal. Analysts who raise uncomfortable conclusions too soon are often told to wait for more evidence, refine their assessment, or broaden their perspective. These instructions appear reasonable. They signal rigor and caution. But they also delay action until accuracy is no longer destabilizing. Over time, this creates a behavioral filter. Accuracy is rewarded when it arrives alongside permission, when leadership is ready, when disruption has already become unavoidable. Accuracy is punished when it arrives alone. This punishment is rarely overt. It appears as exclusion from key discussions, loss of influence, stalled advancement, or reputational labeling as alarmist or unreliable. The message is clear without being spoken. Being wrong safely is better than being right early. This is how institutions quietly invert their stated values. They continue to claim accuracy as a priority while rewarding behaviors that blunt its impact. They select for analysts who can anticipate what conclusions will be accepted, not necessarily which conclusions are most correct. The system does not need to silence accuracy. It simply needs to make it inconvenient. And over time, that inconvenience reshapes how information is produced, framed, and delivered. Once accuracy becomes risky, institutions do not need to suppress it explicitly. They socialize around it. This process is gradual and largely invisible. It happens through observation rather than instruction. New analysts, officers, and managers learn by watching what happens to those who raise uncomfortable conclusions. They see which voices are invited back into decision-making rooms and which slowly disappear. They notice whose assessments shape policy and whose work is acknowledged but sidelined. Over time, patterns become clear. Accuracy that aligns with expectation is rewarded. Accuracy that challenges it is tolerated only up to a point. This is how institutions train behavior without issuing rules. People learn how to phrase conclusions cautiously. They learn to emphasize uncertainty even when confidence is high. They learn to frame warnings as possibilities rather than judgments. They learn to avoid being the sole voice insisting on urgency. This is not dishonesty. It is adaptation. The system teaches its members how to survive. Over time, this socialization produces a specific kind of professional, someone who understands the limits of acceptable accuracy, someone who can anticipate which conclusions will be actionable and which will be treated as disruptive. This person is often described as experienced, balanced, and pragmatic. But what they have really learned is timing. They know when accuracy will be welcomed and when it will be punished. They know when to speak plainly and when to slow the process. They know how to be right without forcing the institution to confront the implications of being wrong. As this behavior spreads, the institution begins to select for it. Those who adapt remain influential. Those who do not are gradually marginalized, not through discipline, but through exclusion. They are consulted less, promoted more slowly, positioned as technically skilled but strategically naive. Eventually, the institution no longer needs to discourage accuracy directly. It has trained its people to do it themselves. At that point, inaccurate conclusions do not need to be fabricated. They emerge naturally from a system that rewards safety over disruption. The institution has not lost its ability to detect reality. It has lost its willingness to act on it when the cost is high. This is the long-term consequence of treating accuracy as a liability. Institutions do not become blind. They become cautious in ways that systematically favor being wrong safely over being right decisively. This creates a specific failure mode. Risks are identified but described as manageable. Warnings are acknowledged but deferred. Problems are framed as evolving rather than urgent. By the time accuracy is allowed to fully surface, the window for meaningful action has often closed. From the outside, this looks like surprise. From the inside, it looks like inevitability. Everyone involved can point to documents, discussions, and caveats that show the issue was considered. Responsibility is diffuse. No single decision stands out as negligent. This is how institutions protect themselves from the consequences of accuracy. The deeper effect is cultural. As generations of personnel move through the system, the lesson becomes embedded. Accuracy is valuable, but only when it arrives at the right moment. Certainty is dangerous unless it is shared. Urgency is suspect unless it is sanctioned. Over time, institutions stop asking who is most correct. They ask who is safest to listen to. This is why failures repeat even when information improves. Better data does not overcome incentives that punish early clarity. More analysis does not help if decisive conclusions create personal risk. In fact, improved analytical capability can worsen the problem. The more precisely risks are understood, the harder they are to ignore. And the harder they are to ignore, the more threatening they become to institutional stability. So they are managed instead. This is not a flaw in intelligence, expertise, or professionalism. It is a feature of systems that prioritize continuity over correction. When accuracy creates obligation without protection, it will always be moderated. When being right creates exposure without authority, it will always be delayed. This is why institutions often appear most confident shortly before failure. Not because they lack information, but because they have successfully neutralized it. Understanding this does not make institutions malicious, but it does explain why truth alone rarely changes outcomes. Until accuracy is rewarded not just in principle, but in consequence, institutions will continue to train themselves to misunderstand reality. And the people inside them will continue to learn the same lesson. That being right is only valuable when it is safe.